Hey guys, welcome back for another night. Tonight we are going to talk about LB7s and their issue with loping at idle or surging at idle. Basically, just a little bit of backstory with it. So I replaced my lift pump not that long ago, middle of the summer maybe. Basically, my old air dog went out. I bought it used when I was in college, and it lasted for several years on top of that, but even so, it finally went out and left me kind of stuck, so I had to replace it real quick with a fast 150. You can see the filter sitting down there. And basically the difference between those two is my air dog was running a pressure spring, a pressure return spring of about 5 pounds. Basically pushes about 5 psi to the CP3 itself, whereas this new fast pump pushes around 10 to 11 psi, and we're going to look at the gauge. You can see exactly where it's at. But basically that is causing an issue between the FICM, the fuel injection control module, and the FPR. So basically it's causing it to lope and surge, and so we're going to figure out why exactly that's happening and see what we can do to solve that. So you can see we're out here at the farm shop. Everything's kind of tucked in here. We had our first big snow, being about 3 inches worth overnight, and so everything's really nasty, including the truck. It's absolutely filthy. I wanted to get it rinsed off, but I'm going to wait one more day, and I'll rinse it off tomorrow night and get it cleaned up for, hopefully it's supposed to stay a little bit nicer than after that. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. But anyway, I'll flip the camera around, we'll look at the gauge, and we'll look at the FICM and all that kind of stuff, and see exactly what's going on. So one thing different on the LB7s versus the newer trucks, sitting right down here, apologize everything's a little bit dirty here, but the LB7s have an FICM, a fuel injection control module that sits right here. And from the factory, they are fuel cooled. So the fuel comes up from the other side of the motor, comes across and comes through the fuel injection control module first before then going through, well, if I had it, the OEM fuel filter would sit here and then it would go into the CP3 and get pressurized to go into the fuel rail. But that is different from the LLYs, the LBZs and up. They do not actually have one of these. So my fuel routing is a little bit different. You can see there's a 1/2 inch hose right down here. Actually, it's a little bit dark, but you can't really see it. It's that hose sticking right there. And then I've got a little pressure sensor right here that goes up to one of my gauges, and then it directly feeds right into the CP3 that's right down here. It comes from a 1/2 inch line all the way from the lift pump directly into a 1/2 inch fuel fitting on the CP3 itself, just to provide as much fuel as absolutely possible directly to the CP3. Okay, so I've got the key on, so the lift pump is running. Now this is my low pressure supply gauge right here, right? So it's kind of showing, it's kind of bouncing right around 9 right now. With the key on, the truck running, it's normally kind of in that 10 to 11 range, which is just a little bit more than what the FICM and the FPR are expecting to see. You know, normally it's actually seeing a vacuum there because the CP3 will be pulling the fuel from the tank, but with a lift pump in there, it's pushing the fuel to the CP3 instead, and so it can handle up to 5 to 6 to 8 psi, but when it gets up in that 10 to 11, 12 range, it starts to cause a little bit of an issue, starts to cause a little bit of a loping surge, which really didn't pronounce itself too much. I noticed it just a tiny bit over the summer when the truck was a little bit warmer, it didn't take quite as long to warm up, but now when the truck is cold and it's in drive, it surges pretty hard. So basically this was not an issue with my air dog because it had a 5 pound return spring in it, so it was only pushing around 5 psi. They actually came with 2 different springs, I believe. You could either run a 10-pound spring or you could run a 5-pound spring. And that 5-pound spring was known to work a lot better with the LB7s because they have this finicky FICM. But my lift pump on my, this new fast pump is pushing in kind of that 10 to 11, 12 psi. So what we need to do is we need to get that spring out and snip it down just a little bit so that it's pushing, allowing just a little bit less pressure to go through. So we kind of get it down into that 5 to 6 to 7 range, and hopefully the truck will be running a little bit more healthy after that. Now the first step in this process is, for me, because I have a sump, is to clamp this line right here. Basically, if I don't clamp this line, the fuel just will, is gravity fed, so it will just continue to flow and flow and flow until the tank is empty. So if you have a set of fuel line clamps, that would work better. Basically, suppliers that will basically just clamp down that line, but I don't have one of those. So I am just using a vice grips with a piece of basically rag on there, basically just protect the line, but basically just to clamp that off so the fuel cannot flow. So it'll be a little bit of that comes out, whatever's in the line there, but after that we should be good. So now I can pull the lift pump down and start to take it apart. Okay, so everything's a little bit dirty here because of all the snow and everything, but even so, basically this line here is where it's feeding in from the tank itself. And then this line here is the return line that goes back up and goes back into the fill neck. And then this line here is what actually goes up to the CP3 itself. So basically fuel comes in from here, comes through, it goes through the water separator and the fuel filter itself, and the fuel goes up, and this is where the fuel is returned to the tank. So we need to remove this lower fitting here, and the spring and the ball and the ball valve and all that kind of stuff is seated right inside this block. So we pull this all apart, pull that out, and snip down the spring. Here I've taken the line off, it's hanging out right there. And here's the fitting that came out of there. And there's the spring we're talking about. It's real easy access. It's not really a hard job. So let's pull that out and we'll cut it off. When you pull this spring out, chances are the little ball is actually going to come with it. So do not lose that ball. Do not let it drop and roll away or get all filled with gunk. You need to keep that perfectly clean and just set it aside in a little rag. We have to put that back in with it once we've got the spring cut down. Okay guys, here's the spring. Here's the non-cut end. And I just snipped a little bit off one end here. That's basically all I did. It was identical. So basically I just cut it off right there at that tip to cut off that one bottom loop. So here's just a little bit here. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna put it all back together and see where we're at before I cut any more. So hopefully this will kind of get us right where we wanna be at, but I would rather cut not enough than cut too much, obviously. You can always cut more off. It's an easy thing to get to. So we'll go ahead and put this thing back together here real quick, just following the steps we just did. And see, we'll prime the truck back up and see where we're at on the gauge. All right guys, so everything's back together now. Basically just had to re-put this fitting on with the spring and the ball in it, and then remount the return line here. So hopefully we're in good shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and key it on and see where we're at. Okay, so we're sitting at about 10 right now, and it's really, really firm. Before it was bouncing a whole lot more. Right now it's kind of just hanging out there at 9.6, 9.8. So that looks a lot better. We'll go ahead and fire it up. Looks like we're holding steady here. It looks good with the truck on. It's a little bit lower than it was before. Go ahead and put it in drive here real quick. That's great. You can hear the truck behind me. It's just sitting here in idle the way it's supposed to. It doesn't seem to be loping anymore. So we're gonna go ahead and remount everything. I'm actually gonna put on 2 new filters at the same time. And we'll see how it does over the next day or two. Hopefully we won't have to cut any more off, but it seems to be doing quite a bit better. The truck is about 136 degrees, so it's a little cool. So if it was going to lope, it would be doing it right now. So right now I'm pretty hopeful. We'll see how it does. So just to follow up, guys, the truck's now been running like this for 2 days, and it is a huge difference for me. It has been. Truck does not lope at all when just idling. It doesn't lope at all when it's in gear. It doesn't surge at all. The truck just seems to be idling quieter in general. So not to say this is the catch-all. If you have any kind of a surging or idling issue, you might have an FPR problem. You can check that on your edge by looking at your fuel rail pressure versus your desired fuel rail pressure. And if your actual fuel rail pressure cannot hold to what your desired fuel rail is asking for, if it's bouncing around, plus or minus 2 or 3, or sorry, 0.2 or 3, you might be having a little bit of an issue with your FPR. It might be going bad depending on how old the truck is. Those are known for going out, especially on the older trucks. But in this case, if you have an LB7 with a fast pump and it seems like it's just acting really weird, especially as the weather gets colder, not sure why that 100% is, but this is a good indication. So thanks, guys. I also want to thank here real quick Andrew Carker down at IOD, Line Outlaw Diesel. He helped me basically through this process. I was just sending him pictures, and he kind of taught me as I was going too. So it's a pretty simple thing. It only takes about 30 minutes if you can get your fast down or your air dog, whatever it may be, down and out of its location to get it to a point where you can actually get to it. But other than that, it's a pretty easy swap. So thanks, guys.